But once again, Rajul, thanks a lot for making time for us. We've obviously done a fair bit to try and let people know who you are, and I think people are already well aware. But just for completeness, would love for the quick, 2-minute intro on your background, the businesses you built, what you're doing today at Leo Capital, and then we'll dive right into the more subject matter areas of what we wanted to discuss.
Sure. Again, thank you for inviting me, and good to meet everyone on the call. So my name is Rajul, and I graduated in 1998 from IIT Delhi, and then I became an entrepreneur right away. So I'm an entrepreneur turned VC. The first company I started is Pine Labs, which is a leading payment company. You swipe your card, you'll probably have heard of it. I'm not no more involved in the company. I sold a long time back, probably too early. But I did build the software, so very proud to sort of see it go all the way. Then I started a company called Global Logic, and I think this topic particularly is of interest to me also because when I was in Global Logic, I was one of four co-founders, and my title was Chief Operating Officer, COO. So for 6 years, I sort of held intense operational role, grew the team. Life was all about operations completely. I think I did sort of a mini PhD on ops. This is in early 2000s. And then Global Logic got sold as well, eventually to Apex, large private equity player. Gradually turned investor. First, I started investing my own money as an individual. Did that for a few years, got into some interesting companies like Misho, 1MG, bunch of others. And then basically started Leo Capital, where we make early stage tech investments in startups for the last 8 years. I think in between, I also did an ed tech venture called Sunstone, which is kind of now being run by a different team as still a small show, also a very operational business, in terms of student experience and this and that. So I think all I would say is that sort of a lot of operations and sort of VC experience with operations is very close to my heart. I think that is the source of strategic advantage for most companies eventually. Because all the other fancy stuff kind of dies down gradually and people catch up. But it's the guts of the business, how you turn the wheels day in, day out, which matter and ultimately make the difference. So it's a topic which is close to me.
No, I'm very glad, Rajul, that you agree with all of us that ops does indeed matter. And maybe with that, we jump right into sort of like understanding how these things happened in the past, right? So for this session, I think we'll do it in three parts. For one is to understand, some of these more traditionally ops heavy industries that you've either built, you worked in, you serviced as a technology provider at Global Logic, at Mind Labs. How have these evolved over time? Second, to try and understand in this day and age how you're seeing AI transform these kind of businesses. And then also some context for folks who are trying to build their own software and product companies, either in the audience immediately today or folks in the community and otherwise who will view this later. What advice you might have for, not just how to build a business that is leveraging AI, but to also leverage AI in your own business itself, right? To improve your operations, your productivity, and so on and so forth. So maybe starting off with the first one, it'd be awesome to get a little bit of perspective. You mentioned that there was a lot of operational intensity in the work that you were doing as you were building both of these companies. What did operations at Pine Labs, at Global Logic, at similar players, back in the 2000s, what did that look like? What did ops mean? And in the context of the business you've built, what does operations excellence broadly look like? I think that'd be a fantastic grounding for us to move ahead with the session.
Yeah, yeah. So look, maybe let me start with Global Logic, and then I'll talk about Pine Labs as well. So Global Logic was and is a more traditional services company. So it's a simple business, like you can say Infosys or Wipro. You find customers. The specific positioning of a Global Logic was to service product companies. So our customers were companies like Microsoft, Google, Telcordia, sort of large technology companies who were looking to operationalize their R&D globally versus, let's say, a Wipro or Infosys or TCS, which in the day were servicing more the CIO function, like things like SAP implementation, Oracle implementation, tools. They were part of the CIO budget and we were part of the CTO budget in that sense, right? But from our perspective, from a day-to-day perspective, what it meant was putting teams together, delivering engineering results, and basically getting paid. So we would sort of submit a timesheet ultimately, right? We were charging per hour, per day, and the industry largely has continued to work in the same way, where people produce a timesheet, which is the key deliverable, at the end of the month, and you invoice on that basis. So I think it was really literally back in Global Logic in the day, and I'll come also forward to how it's kind of changing, but it was really all ops because I think if you think about the business, it's really when you're selling thin air. In some sense, you go to a customer and say, we'll become a part of your R&D team, we'll help build your products. And then it's all about sort of staffing those projects, right from staffing, which is, finding the right people, so there's a whole team of recruiters, and so there's one portion of ops, right, which is kind of finding those people from the open market, getting through the interview process. So, making sure that so operational excellence would look like interviewing enough candidates, making sure that, you're doing it the right way, you're sending out the offers, following up on the offers, getting them onboarded, then sort of getting them retained in the company, and then all those people being put to work in the right opportunities. Imagine that at a 10,000 people scale or 100,000 people scale, right? And then basically making sure that people are actually coming to office, working, making sure sort of, their buses are going on time to pick them up, the food shows up, which never happened, basically, that people are happy with food, and things like that. So I think, and then I think on the customer end, producing obviously, work proofs, customer management, which is kind of measured by the customer satisfaction score, making sure the employees are happy, which is measured by the employee satisfaction score, and then basically the financial metrics of it, that you're making enough money by the end of it. So there's enough gross margin, there's low churn, and then you're growing all that. So, right. So there's like a big, massive operations. There's like, that's all there is. I mean, that's 80% of the business. It's basically 20% sales and then 80% is business, you know. Sorry, you're saying something.
No, I was just also asking how many folks worked at Global Logic at that point of time, right? How many buses, how many lunches, and lunchtime disappointments were y'all handling
A
at that
lot.
point?
It felt like a lot. The disappointments felt like a lot. But I think I think when I sort of ceased being a CEO, we were about 1,000 people. So I became the CEO sort of in 2001, 2002, and then I hired a CEO in 2006, and then I moved to M&A. So for like 5, 6 years, it was directly responsible to me, and I think about 1,000 grew to 1,000 people.
Got
So
it.
it's a
Understood.
that was a lot. Like, I mean, I like even simple things like if I would come to my office, on my average day, I would have like 12, 13, 14 meetings, half an hour time slot. My calendar was like packed, right? And I think right from then your customers meeting in the evening, and typically one meeting would stop, the next would be standing outside kind of thing. So like intense operational role for many
No,
years.
completely
Yeah.
understand. And if you switch gears to say a company that's like Pine Labs, right? Which obviously you spent a lot of time there in a
Yeah.
more software technology role, but at the
Yeah.
end of the day, going out, deploying POSes, convincing shopkeepers that this is a payment mode that you need to take, right?
Yeah.
We all of us were probably back in like school at that point of time. I mean, not all of us, but most of us were probably back in school. We're more familiar with the QR code deployment era of the UPI sort of like proliferation, right? But back in the day, when you were deploying these POSes for the first time and card payments weren't really even a thing in India, could you tell us a little bit about what operations look like at that
Yeah.
point of time as well?
Certainly. So, if you take a step back and look at the larger payment ecosystem, then whether you have a QR code or whether you swipe your card on a point of sales terminal, the larger ecosystem is still the same, which means that, somebody is a pair, it's called an issuer, somebody is an acquirer, the merchant, things like that. And then there is a bank involved usually, there's reconciliation and things like that. So actually the overall ops in the ecosystem are massive. If you think of, let's start with, acquirer ops, the sales ops, as it's called, let's say, right? So now you have all these merchants, right? And in our day, terminals needed to be deployed at these merchants. So physically, there was a company, maybe they're still in business, they're called High Tech at the time. And this is all they did. They basically had a field force of literally thousands of people who would go and physically put these terminals out there, train merchants how to use them. And in those days, they used to run on telephone lines to make sure that the telephones line work, right? And basically, transaction is going through. and sort of, merchant is happy and things like that. That has turned into QR code today, but I'm sure still there is an element of merch. Somebody's still going there, pasting the QR code. This competitor, somebody pastes something else on top of your QR code. So you want to go back and make sure, it's still there. You still need to make sure that the merchant is using it, knows how to use it. Obviously, some things have become easier. You don't have to worry about phone line, but I'm sure it's still. And now, for example, you have the sound boxes, which is again sort of the hardware. So again, I'm sure people are going in, deploying it, maintaining it, and things like that. So it's actually, if you look at the merchant side of the operations, it's become better mainly because the phone line not being there, because that was a whole problem in its own. But it has also expanded manyfold. So that's one whole merchant side of operations. Then you have the whole, user side of operations. Again, sort of at that time, we were doing these chip cards or magnetic swipe cards and things like that. So again, there's a whole ops involved in making sure that card reaches that person, they're able to use it, it always works, and all that stuff, which today has been changed to a mobile phone. Many people are using mobile apps, for these kind of products. But again, there is a operational component of, let's say, sending them statements. Then there is a whole operational component of managing loyalty programs, which continues to be a big part of this whole thing, right? So basically, how many points you get, when you commit points, what happens to those points, those rupees, if there's a cashback, that cashback is actually getting through, things like that. So that's another sort of huge operational component. And then basically there's the whole compliance and the bank side, which people don't even see. There's the massive reconciliation. Just imagine, right? Like at a scale, there's so much happening, right? So there's usually in this industry an end of day process, which is run every day, which is kind of produces these all kinds of reports. In our time, this used to be like printouts, that used to come out. And I remember sort of literally people used to look at them, every day and say, okay, yeah, the totals match here. At least the card side total matches to the merchant side total. And if it doesn't match, it's like a nightmare. Then you go through literally, why it doesn't match. And, you have to reconcile because it's an audit issue. These are
Yep,
financial
yep.
systems, stuff like that. So the operational component in these ecosystems is significant, not depending on where you play. If you're a pure technology provider, you might do just that bit of it, right? But in the ecosystem, there's massive ops, that kind of keeps it up and running.